Hello everyone, this is John Bridekirk, and today for my course presentation I'll be covering what is called grounded visualization. Grounded visualization is really a form of qualitative research that has adopted and incorporated the use of visuals in order to gain a better understanding of a particular topic of study. What is important about grounded visualization and what I will be emphasizing throughout this presentation is that through the use of visuals, it offers those that are being studied the ability to self-express and provide deeper insight into a topic or research question that might otherwise not be possible. So for this presentation, I will be outlining the following subjects. First, I'll explain what exactly is qualitative research for those who may not be familiar with the subject. And from there, I'll talk about a very common theoretical and analytical tool used in qualitative research, which is grounded theory. From there, I'll talk about how visuals have been used within qualitative research and what purpose and insight they provide. And from there, I'll go into what exactly is grounded visualization. And there I will talk about some empirical examples where grounded visualization has been used and what they have found out. Okay, so what is qualitative research? Of course, qualitative research covers a wide variety of research. There's many definitions to what exactly is qualitative research. But on a broad level, it is the systematic collection, interpretation, and organization of textual information. And what does this mean exactly? It just means that researchers have the opportunity to investigate a topic by collecting information from others. And the information they collect may revolve around a wide variety of aspects dealing with a certain subject. So it might deal with people's understanding of the subject, their thoughts and feelings of the subject, or perhaps their opinions and insights of that subject as well. So qualitative research originally has its roots or began within the field of sociology and was used in an effort to understand social phenomenon, to develop and explain social phenomenon itself. But of course, now we all know that qualitative research has expanded across a wide variety of disciplines. We have it in psychology, we have it in education. This is just to name a few. But the idea is, regardless of where qualitative research is being conducted, its underlying methods are still the same. We're asking the why and we're asking the how. What we're really trying to do is gain a more in-depth understanding of a particular topic, either by studying it within a social environment or asking people who live through these experiences why they do things the way they do, or why things happen the way they are. So of course, there's a wide variety of techniques that can be used in qualitative research. Here is one example, one-to-one interviews, where a researcher may interview subjects one at a time to talk to them about that subject. The next one we have is focus groups, where perhaps a researcher chooses to have a larger group setting. So instead of interviewing people one-to-one, they may interview people within a larger setting, so multiple people at once. And another example we have, which is not as common, but is known as naturalistic observation. And this involves where the researcher may not necessarily engage with the subjects that they're interested in studying, but instead may take a third person approach where they view these individuals within a natural setting to see how certain engagements and behaviors occur within their natural environment. And of course, for this, I'm just mentioning a few examples of how qualitative research can be used, but of course, there's a wide variety of more techniques out there. So as I was mentioning, there's a wide variety of techniques that can be used within a qualitative setting, but really the method that is chosen may depend really on the research question that is being investigated. So for example, if the research question or the context of the research question has to deal with sensitive material perhaps, then perhaps certain methods may be more appropriate than others. And based on some of these examples, using one-to-one interviews, focus groups, and naturalistic observation, I will be providing some examples of how qualitative or grounded visualization can be used in all three of these settings and what they can provide. And of course, it is in these different environments that grounded visualization can be quite important, because it gives participants that ability to share experiences in a manner that may be very difficult to put into words. So meaning through self-expression, through some sort of visualization, that individuals can express things and provide explanation for some phenomenon that might be very difficult to talk about. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is a very popular theoretical and analytical tool used within qualitative research, which is known as grounded theory. And grounded theory is really a framework that can aid the researcher with qualitative research. Really, it's a step-by-step guide that'll help the researcher with the collection of their data, the coding of their data, and of course the categorization of the information within the data. Grounded visualization is a very active process, and right from the beginning of a study, right when a researcher starts interviewing subjects, researchers should be actively engaging with the information they're collecting. And what that means is, for example, I have a little image here, they should be transcribing that information, putting it into a textual format so they could start interpreting that information for the first step, which is meaning. So the idea here is that certain things may begin to stand out within this textual information, and if there's overlapping themes or ideas, then you may have what is called meaning units. As you start interviewing more people, and as these overlapping themes become more abundant and very, let's say, more clear, then you may have what is termed as emerging themes. And once you start developing these themes, especially when it comes to a write-up or in a scientific article, you may want to put these themes into broader, more general categories to explain these themes a little bit more clearly. But of course, with grounded theory, with any type of qualitative research, really, you want to be constantly comparing the information you are collecting. So you wouldn't go through one individual's transcript just once, but you might go through it multiple times. Review that transcript over and over again to look at those meaning, to look at those themes, and then of course at the ending those categories. So visualizations in qualitative research. Once again, similar to qualitative research itself, this is a very broad term, and there's really multiple types of techniques that could be used. So what types of techniques a researcher may choose to incorporate within their study really would depend on the subject matter or really what they're hoping to achieve. So for example, some techniques may involve a researcher asking participants to draw something, maybe to create or sculpt something a little bit more physical in nature, or perhaps it involves some sort of craft as well. But the idea is the visualizations that could be used in comparison to the interviews, in comparison to the focus groups, should be offering that additional self-expression for that individual. It should be adding something to the study, and that's what a lot of these studies set out to do. So when it comes to visualizations in qualitative research, there's technically no default approach to how visualizations should be used. This is a very free and open process, and it does provide a lot of flexibility to the researcher. But at the same time, there's a lot of caveats that are involved when you are trying to combine visualizations with qualitative research. And some of those caveats it really comes down to the purpose and why you want to use visuals. So for example, one of those caveats should be that you plan on using visuals because it may provide that extra insight that might otherwise not be possible. So for example, maybe you want to talk about some complex issues, and that maybe visualizations can be an aid to help talk about those issues. An important thing that a lot of researchers talk about when using visualizations is that perhaps it'll capture some of those subtleties that may be very difficult to put into words. A very important thing about grounded visualization is that with imagery, with visualizations, it can promote conversation as well. So for perhaps someone is drawing something or has provided a visual, then the researcher can talk about that visual. What exactly does that mean to the person, or maybe something is standing out, such as those subtleties. And a really important thing within qualitative research, and something that should be mentioned, is that there should be some sort of benefit for the participant to engage in these visualizations as well. It shouldn't just be merely for the kicks of the researcher, but it should involve, perhaps there's like a therapeutic element to why visualization should be used, or there is something that could be beneficial. With a lot of qualitative research, you want that reciprocal relationship to be taking place. It's not just a matter of the researcher extracting information from the participant. The participant should be receiving something as well from the study. And of course, by combining visuals with qualitative research, we may have new themes. So through the grounded theory approach, a researcher may be transcribing text, looking for meaning, looking for themes, looking for those overarching categories. But the nice thing is, by incorporating these visuals, you may be able to build on themes, perhaps expand existing themes, or really find new themes in general. So here I want to talk about some broad methods on how visualizations can be used with qualitative research. Here I've sort of categorized into three broad methods. The art-based method, which is over here, is really the participant creating a visual and expressing the meaning of that visual to the researcher. So the researcher is just there sort of as like a subtle body to understand the visual from the participant's perspective. On the other hand, we have what is called art-informed, where the participant creates some sort of visual, but it's really up to the researcher to interpret what exactly that visual is. So in this case, it's the researcher interpreting the visual, whereas in the art-based, it's the participant interpreting the visual for the researcher. And then what is really nice with the grounded visualization approach, we have a reciprocal relationship. The participant incorporates a visual, expresses that visual to the researcher, but at the same time the researcher can engage in a conversation with that individual to what exactly does this visual mean, and it can promote more of that conversation. And that's where we come into grounded visualization. So grounded visualization is exactly that. It's a mixed method approach. It is combining qualitative research with visualizations. The idea here is you can get more interpretations, perhaps expand across more dimensions, and get more viewpoints at the same time. And with a lot of visualizations being incorporated in qualitative research, it's really there to capture some of those subtleties. And one thing you may be asking yourself is, why exactly are visuals being partnered with qualitative research? Well, a lot of articles that are out there are explaining that really visuals and qualitative research have a lot of similar properties to them. They're both exploratory, they're iterative, they can be particular and general, and can have multiple interpretations. And all this means is that when it's exploratory, is that qualitative and visuals can explore information in multiple ways. Whether it's through conversation or whether it's through visuals, you can consider various ways of exploring a topic. On the other hand, if it's iterative, the idea here is that it can be used in multiple ways. So for example, it's not necessarily a linear approach. Perhaps you want to collect information over and over again from that same person, so you may ask them to do more visuals than just one. So that's where it's iterative. And if it's particular and general, the idea here is that it can be concrete or abstract. Meaning you could talk about abstract topics that are not necessarily tangible, or perhaps you could talk about those that are more concrete, and in this case it could be put on a larger general scale. And then of course, when it comes to multiple interpretations, qualitative and visualizations both share that characteristic, where they can perhaps fill in the gaps where the other one was missing that information. And what that means is you may have collected that textual information, but perhaps the visuals themselves can add some additional information that can fill in some of the gaps of your study. And that is where I want to now go into 3 examples that I have collected for this presentation, all dealing with grounded visualization, but using some different qualitative methods. I've included the Canadian flag here because all three examples are Canadian studies. They're Canadian based, and I thought it'd be interesting to explore each one of these. So the first one will be a one-to-one interview, the second will be a focus group, and the last one will be a naturalistic observation. So the first study here is called Draw and Tell, Dietary Acculturation as Lived by Black Immigrant Children of African and Caribbean Descent Residing in Canada. So as I was previously mentioning, this is a one-to-one interview format. The researchers interviewed 161 school children and really asked these children to make 2 drawings. And what the drawings were supposed to be about was the foods that they are eating. So one of the drawings was to ask about the foods that they're eating in Canada. So what are your Canadian foods? And then the other drawing was about foods that they were eating in their home country. So in their African and Caribbean homes, what types of foods were you eating? And of course, you may be asking yourself, why is it appropriate or important to be using a grounded visualization technique within this context? Well, I can pretty much explain what the researchers said in the article. Number one, they said visualizations are important because of the demographic that they are studying. They're studying school children who are relatively young and shy, and that this would perhaps give them the opportunity to express themselves through drawing that may otherwise not be possible. They might be too shy to talk about certain subjects. So by getting them to draw, which comes to my second point here, is that it gives them the power. It empowers them and shows them that their opinions are valued and sort of shifts the role where the researcher isn't really the expert here. It's more the child because it's the child's drawings that are the centerfold for the conversation that is to take place. And of course here, what I'm showing is some examples from the research article. These are the drawings that the children did. This is an example. And what you see here is that there is some subtle differences between the Canadian to the African Caribbean diet. You can pretty much see it's on the left-hand side here. We have the Canadian. We have what looks like pizzas here. And then we also, interestingly, have some electronic gadgets that have been included as well, which looks like a TV monitor and a computer screen. And then, of course, we have on the other side, which is technically the more traditional African Caribbean diet that the children were more accustomed to. And what is really important to mention is that just through these visuals themselves, that the researchers were able to categorize the types of foods or the top foods that children were eating. In the African and Caribbean homes, we have rice, which is very common, and dough and bread, and lentils and peas. And what is really interesting is on the Canadian side, we have more of the processed foods that are a little bit more popular. We have the pizza, we have the sugar-sweetened beverages, we have fries, poutine, etc. But what's interesting is that through the drawings that it promotes the researcher to ask the children questions about their drawing, and they came up to some pretty interesting findings just through asking the children of their drawings. What they pretty much showed here was that a lot of these children come from single parent households, and because of the dramatic change in their lifestyles now, a lot of these single parents, which are particularly mothers, lack the time to prepare traditional meals. So through a matter of convenience now, are now buying more of these other foods that are more accustomed in Canada. But at the same time, it's not just the home environment that's influencing these foods, but the children are also mentioning that it's very adamant in the school environment as well. All right, so the next study I want to mention is called Body Mapping as a Youth Sexual Health Intervention and Data Collection Tool. This study used a focus group format, which involves interviewing multiple people at once in a group setting, and involved 41 young females between the ages of 13 to 17 years. This study took place in the Northwest Territories of Canada and was really a method of designing an education intervention tool, also known as a sex education tool, to really get these women talking about the changes that they're experiencing. And those changes really are dealing with puberty and entering young adulthood, and any questions or concerns they may have about sex, their sexual identity, various topics dealing with sex ed. And the method that was used here is known as body mapping. And what body mapping is probably something that we've all done even as children, is where you would lay down on a large piece of paper and someone would trace the outline of your body. And after tracing the outline of your body, you would use this image as a canvas to draw or paint various things that you may have concerns about regarding the topic of sex ed. So they could draw on various parts of their body, they could write things, whatever they felt was appropriate or what they were comfortable doing. And as I was mentioning, the idea here is to talk about the perspectives of change. What changes are they going through physically or emotionally, and that they could describe these things within the canvas of their body. And why was this approach important to use for these young women? Well, according to the researchers, sex ed needs to be promoted more, and in order to do that, they wanted to create a new intervention tool. But it wasn't just a matter of creating a new intervention tool. They wanted to also create something that would have some sort of therapeutic element involved as well. They wanted to engage young women from the Northern Territories of Canada to openly express and talk about sex education, the awareness and challenges they may be going through, and really to promote open conversation. And why it was so important to talk about these things is because there's a seriously high rate of STIs that are prevalent amongst young people within the Northern Territories, and there's a high rate of pregnancy. So it was important to develop a tool that allowed these young women to self-reflect, introspect, and connect with others, especially when it comes to dealing with complex or, hard issues to talk about in such a setting. And of course here what we have is the prompts that were used during the body mapping exercise. I'm not going to go through all the prompts, but the idea was these young women would use these in an effort to talk about the various things and changes that they were going through. And of course, here is an example of a body map now. This was a young woman. She laid down, they drew, outlined her body, and then she was given the opportunity to express the different things that she was going through, or that things that she felt like she could express within this format. And overall, what is important to mention here is that it is these tools that can really be used to facilitate that personal connectedness, that introspection with oneself, but also processing difficult things that are not necessarily easy to talk about, and especially within a group format. So this tool, in example, gave these young women the opportunity to talk about sensitive topics regarding sex, sexuality, and self-identity, but at the same time it gave them the opportunity to ask questions as well. And here is just a quote from the study itself, from a young woman. It says, "I really like how we did body mapping in the Foxy workshop, because it does get you to understand yourself better, and it makes you realize that it's not all bad and there's a lot of good in you too. It makes you think more about your personality and the good stuff about yourself instead of your looks." Alright, so the next study I would like to talk about is called "I Was Here: Young Mothers Who Have Experienced Homelessness Use Photo Voice and Participatory Qualitative Analysis to Demonstrate Strengths and Assets." This study involved a naturalistic observation and involved 5 young mothers who were homeless within Toronto, Ontario. What the naturalistic observation involved was these women photo blogging. They were given cameras and asked to pretty much retrace some of the steps or their daily lives being homeless within the big city. They used the cameras to pretty much narrate their lives as they were either pregnant or were already mothers on the street. The idea here was that through naturalistic observation, they can outline their daily lives and their experiences on the street, but also use a narrative to explain the changes that they made for themselves to move off the street. Now that they weren't alone, now that they had a child or that they were expecting a child, these 5 young mothers made dramatic changes for themselves to move their lives off the street, and that through photoblogging they could demonstrate those changes that they made for themselves, or at least express some of the emotional turmoil that they were going through. And why was this approach important? Well, number one, it was important because it's a method of exploring how these mothers live their lives on the street. What type of information is really out there depicting this stuff? Not a lot. So this was a study using a very unique method of exploring life on the street as a pregnant or expecting mother. But at the same time, it was to provide a meaning engagement for these women. It was for them to sort of like retrace the changes that they made for themselves and how they moved their life from on the street to off the street. And one of the more important things, and which I have highlighted here on this slide, it is really to give these young women a voice on the changes that they had to do and the trials and tribulations that they had to face. It's a matter of overcoming the negative stereotypes of homelessness that are commonly attributed to people on the street and explore the changes that they made for themselves. And now what we have here is an example of an image that was taken from the article itself. We have what is almost like a before and after image. We have image number 1, where this young mother took an image that she titled Caged In, and then we have the second image taken by the same young mother titled Free as a Bird. And the interpretation and the information that this young woman provided, and what many of the young women seem to agree upon because they shared these images, is that there was major changes that they had to make for themselves. This young woman was pregnant at this time on the street, feeling completely caged in, feeling that all the life challenges and adversity were just too hard to overcome. But once she felt that she could make this change, which is free as a bird, that there was some sort of motivation behind motherhood. Motherhood made some sort of change for herself that she knew that she could do, and then at this point wanted to take an image or a picture to demonstrate how that change occurred for herself. And for what better way for me to explain these images than to provide some of the actual quotes from the research article itself that are explaining it by the young women themselves. And this quote says, "But I was talking about was of pregnancy before I actually had my first child. I was pregnant and realized the path I was going to bring another human being into. This was my choice. So there were 2 paths for me to go on, to continue going on this one and bring a child in that, not being in control of my life, and I knew that I couldn't do that to a child, so making the choice to go the straight path and know what is coming." And that was pretty much how the woman herself expressed the image that was previously presented. So in conclusion, grounded visualization or using visualizations within qualitative research do have their merits. And number 1, some people may find that they can express themselves better through art or through some sort of visual. When it comes to such complex topics, they're not necessarily easy to talk about. But as we can see with some of the imagery, that it does provide a doorway and opportunity for people to talk about themselves in an abstract way that is not always easy to do. And of course, there is a double-edged sword to this technique. Just because visualizations can provide alternative meanings and stuff, they do have their caveats. It does not always mean that it is the easier approach to take. So everyone being a researcher, especially when considering visualizations, should consider why they want to use them and what they can offer. And of course, with qualitative research, there should be some reciprocal relationship and benefit between the researcher and participant as well, especially dealing with sensitive subject matter. That was my presentation. Thank you so much for watching.